Great, thanks very much, Carl. Good morning, and thanks obviously to the team from FHA Match for inviting me along. I'm going to kick off with a few slides looking at the overview of the global meat market, and then also some of the trends as they impact the market in Asia Pacific. My name is Tim.Hill from GlobalData. Right, I'll just click on screen share and then expand to the full slideshow. Okay, so four main sectors I'm going to be talking about. First of all, the global challenges, as I said, and the future outlook for the meat sector. Then I'm going to be looking at consumer behavior by Asia Pacific country and looking at generations and how they differ in terms of their meat consumption. Then I'm going to be looking at some of the APAC trends in meat consumption. And then I'm going to be looking at the Asia Pacific priority markets and their characteristics, as well as a regional outlook. And a quick spoiler alert, as you can see from the flags there, the markets that we've decided are the fastest or priority growth ones are Vietnam and Hong Kong. So let's kick off. So some of the global challenges for the meat market. First of all, if you look on the left side of this, the rising price of raw materials. Because animal rearing is an increasingly expensive business, particularly due to the price volatility of agricultural raw materials such as corn. So the increasing cost of animal feed, and this is due to demand for agricultural produce and making biofuel, does mean much higher costs of meat manufacturers. So raw material costs are around 50 to 75% of the total production costs in meat manufacturing. And hence prices of meats, including beef and pig, have risen sharply in recent years due to things like severe drought in major livestock rearing areas in the US and Brazil. And then moving up to the top, the growing demand for clean label products. So there's a growing awareness of the harmful effects of artificial additives used in food products, hence the demand for clean meat products with claims such as hormone-free and antibiotics-free. And of course, for the farmers to deliver clean label meat products free from artificial preservatives does mean higher costs and lower profitability for them. Moving on to the right, the lack of infrastructure facilities. So in many developing countries, the lack of steady and affordable power supply hinders the development of cold chain infrastructure, which of course is vital for prolonging product shelf life. Quality standards and regulations for domestic meat producers, processors, supply chains and retailers does in many cases remain lax, and the shortfall of R&D facilities for new product developments and quality testing laboratories, efficient waste disposal and so on are often big challenges for the meat sector. And then on the bottom of the page, the dietary guidelines issued by government. So the World Health Organization has categorized red and processed meats as carcinogens. So public health bodies in many countries are urging people to limit their intake of meat to reduce their cancer risk. And then on the bottom right, the growing preference for vegan food. And we're seeing this roll out in Asia Pacific as well with people such as Impossible Foods. So consumers are increasingly turning vegan and reducing their meat intake. The demand for plant-based products in the region is growing due to the awareness campaigns launched by organizations such as People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So we're going to look now at some of the growth drivers, the future outlooks for the sector. So with ingredients currently, consumers being wary of the high fat content and their rising health concerns. And this in the future, this is going to lead to development of cultured meats to customize ingredients such as the fat content and omega-3 levels. And it's going to lead to manufacturers to developing cultured meat grown from live living muscle cells taken from animal, including cow, pig, or chicken. So this is what's going to be happening towards the end of the decade, increasingly. Product claims. So consumers around the world are seeking meat products with free from claims. So there's a growing desire for meat products that are organic or natural or grain-fed meats with no added hormones. So as we get closer into the decade or further into the decade, responsible and sustainable consumption is going to be generating even more consumer interest. And areas such as animal welfare and the traceability of products are going to become more important. So this is going to lead to more certification and accreditation for stuff like certified, humane, raised and handled meat sources. The labeling. So the clean labeling trend is going to place an emphasis on the transparency of the food products. This has been driven in some respects by tainted meat incidents, and we've seen this in Asia Pacific as well. And consumers are going to be looking towards third-party certifications. And this is going to lead in the future towards digital labeling systems. And it's going to be leading also towards smart labels. So you can expect to see more of that towards the middle and latter part of the decade. And then in packaging, we're going to be seeing more convenience, easy to use, easy to store packs of meat products, such as lidded tubs. Busy consumer lifestyles are leading to microwavable pouches. So in the future, we can expect to see smaller portions, reusable packs, and more single serve packs as there's going to be a rise in single person household across the world. In the global overview, so global growth in the sectors can be attributed to the increasing urbanization in the top 10 markets. The top 10 markets globally are China, US, Germany, Italy, France, Brazil, Japan, Mexico, Russia, and UK. The global meat sector is valued at 1,267 billion. It's led by Asia Pacific with a 45.8% share of the total value sales. Among the product categories, fresh meats, counter meat is the largest with a value share of 50.6%, followed by chilled raw packaged meat, whole cuts at 16.3% in 2019. And again, in the volume share, Asia Pacific with a 38.6% share led the worldwide meat market, followed by the Americas with 30%, and then Western Europe, and so on. The COVID-19 situation around the world has negatively impacted the sale of meat products due to false claims of the coronavirus being spread by meat products. So these claims have caused the sector's value share to drop to 0.7% in 2020 to 2021, 1.1% between 2019 and 2020, but we do expect growth to increase after 2022. Furthermore, to overcome the loss generated by COVID-19 and the already technology-deprived meat industry, manufacturers are adopting automation and robotics in production and processing. Some of the future inhibitors of the global market is highly resource intensive, one of the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And so meat producers are under increasing pressure to design eco-friendly and sustainable production process, as of course the eco-conscious consumers are turning in part to plant-based proteins in a bid to reduce their own personal carbon footprint. And yes, so the demand for vegetarian diets and veganism is gradually emerging as a challenge for companies in the meat sector, as well as ongoing research into plant-based meat alternatives may divert consumer interests away from meat products. I'm just going to go on to the next slide. Within Asia Pacific, the largest global market, as I mentioned, for meat with a value share of 45.8%. But the region's forecast record just a nominal CAGR of 0.5%. China is going to account for more than 3/4 of the meat sector value sales in the region in 2019, or did account for it, and will account to be the leading market throughout the 2019 to 2024 forecast period. Rising disposable incomes coupled with an increasing urban population are going to drive sales of packaged meat in the region. And growth is set to be driven by the faster growing markets such as Hong Kong and Vietnam. We're going to look at them later. The growth drivers are rising urban population, modernization of the retail industry, particularly in countries such as China and India. Also, on-the-go consumption of meat products, particularly as people start emerging from their homes and going back into the cities for work. They're going to help drive the sector sales as consumers prefer a high-protein diet with less preparation time. Fresh meat is seen as a healthier and tastier option rather than processed meat, and demand reigns highest for the fresh meat. Okay, looking now at the consumption of meat within the Asia Pacific sector, the younger generation are expected to be the ones that are consuming more in the way of high meat. So we've seen here the Gen Z, the millennial generation, followed by Gen Y, are the respondents in Asia Pacific by generation, indicating that they prefer to consume a high meat diet. Within the region, looking at it geographically, what we've noticed is that respondents from Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam are also the ones indicating by geography that they prefer a high meat diet. Going back to the millennial generation, the younger generations again, when we said how would you define your expenditure on meat by generation, it's, as we see here, the millennials followed by the Gen Z, who are likely to say that they buy large portions or buy more frequently. That's the light green. Or the dark green, they're going to buy high-end premium version of those products. So what we've noticed in our consumer surveys is the younger generations are more experimental. They're more likely to splash out more. They're more likely to go for taste. And this is not just when it comes to meat, but also when they look at things like plant-based vegan alternatives. What we notice as well is that, curiously enough, the Gen Ys, followed by the, to extent the Gen Z, but a little bit more the Gen X, they're also likely, they're somewhat likely in light green or extremely likely in dark green to choose plant-based vegan alternatives to red meat. So they're both going for the high-end meat products, buying more alternatives, but they're also curious, experimental, wanting to go for plant-based vegan alternatives as well. When it comes to the reasons for consuming plant-based alternatives to meat and dairy products, so what we've got here is the dark green is the global total, and the light green is the Asia Pacific total, is that health and safety are the main reasons, the main incentives for people in the Asia Pacific region. And notice the differences with the global concerns there. So globally, a bit more concerned about animal welfare than respondents are in the Asia Pacific region. And health is a top reason when we look at this by generation for millennials and then Gen Z, and to an extent the Gen X generation as well. So we've got health in light green, safety in dark green, and taste in black. So yeah, health and safety particularly prevalent amongst the millennial generation there. When we look at changing consumption levels within Asia Pacific, and we've looked at the different sectors here and the percentage of consumption by each sector. So we've got meat, confectionery, dairy and soy food, and so on. What we've noticed is that over time, the meat sector is become less critical. Although it's still growing, it's a less significant proportion of the overall food consumption within Asia Pacific compared with other sectors, such as we see particularly dairy and soy food as being much faster growth or a significant increase in the percentage of the overall diet within Asia Pacific. What we're going to do now is have a look at the high potential countries, and we have a framework for looking at this, which looks at the gives scores for the reward analysis, which is looking at the value and the CAGR, and then the risk analysis and the opportunity that feeds into the overall opportunity score. So we've marked all the Asia Pacific countries for this, but just to look at the priority ones, and we've got 4 countries in the priority ones in terms of the growth opportunity. So of those 4, Hong Kong and Vietnam are the highest priority ones. Not to say they're the largest ones, because as we said earlier, China will continue to be the largest market, but in terms of the growth and opportunity. So have a look at those in a bit more detail. The Hong Kong meat sector, and what we see is a value size of 6 billion. Sorry, that's 6 billion there. In 2014 to 2019, going up to 9. So you can see the CAGR of this current growth period, the period that we're in, is 5%, down a bit from the previous period where it was up to 10.3%. The category share for this is, we see the predominant one is the chilled raw packaged meats, whole cuts in the light green there, then followed by frozen meat, then followed by fresh meat. The packaging material, rigid plastics, is the biggest one, and the distribution channel, hypermarkets and supermarkets, and that's the same actually throughout the Asia Pacific region. They're obviously where the bulk of the meat is being produced. And the leading companies that we see are Putian Food Holdings, Tyson Foods, and Hong Kong Food Investment Holdings. When we look at this a bit more detail by the demography, pretty much equal split, I think, by male and female. But by age group, what we see clearly actually is the older consumers. So it's the 55 plus age category that are particularly fond of meat in Hong Kong and are doing the bulk of the spending on it. Obviously, urbanization, we see Hong Kong being 100% urbanized. Let's compare this to Vietnam. So Vietnam, we're seeing a compound annual growth rate in the 2019 to 2024 sector of 5.7%, which is similar actually to the previous period of 2014 to 2019. The leading companies are Danish Crown, Charoen-Pokphand Group, and the Visan Company Limited. And the category share for them, it's predominantly fresh meat over the counter, takes up 62.4% of the category, followed by a much smaller proportion is the chilled raw packaged meat, and then ambient meat and frozen meat, and so on. But this case actually for Vietnam, the key distribution channel, whereas for the rest of the region is through the hypermarkets and supermarkets, in Vietnam it's through the food and drink specialists. Okay, what I'd like to finish off on is just our future outlook for the region. What do we think are some of the key trends which are going to impact the region over the course of this decade? So halal, 24% of the global Muslim population residing in the Asia Pacific region as of 2019. And so of course that means the demand for halal meat products will continue to increase in the region. So this is true for the high Muslim population countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and India, but it's also increasingly true for other non-Muslim majority countries such as Singapore, where I'm based, where we see a lot of halal meats just throughout the whole country, just to the acceptance of this by the non-Muslim population and of course the halal infrastructure. And then we're going to be seeing halal certification standards, and Malaysia in particular is striving to be a hub for this. The next one is the demand for imported meat products. We talked about food scandals, and this is particularly prevalent in China and Hong Kong. Consumers are concerned about the quality of some of the locally sourced meat products. So because of their concerns for health and safety, as we saw earlier, then there is going to be more of a demand for foreign origin products. So for instance, China's beef imports grew by 54% by September 2019 compared with 2018. 2018. So massive demand for foreign beef, and the core markets that we see for this, for big growth in import products, are China, Vietnam, and Hong Kong. And then the last one for our outlook is the growth opportunities in the digital space. So because of the expansion of e-commerce, and obviously e-commerce has particularly taken off during the pandemic and during the lockdown, we've seen growth opportunities for the online meat trade, and we've seen concepts such as the farm to fork model, for which stock is procured directly from the farmers. An example here, the startup Licious, which raised 30 million in India for its e-commerce platform. It doesn't stock any inventory, but just processes and ships meat on an immediate basis. So that's the conclusion of the high-level look at some of the meat trends as they are globally, and also as they impact the Asia-Pacific region. So with that, I would like to hand back the screen share to Carl and the team from FHA Match.